This video is a part of a sequence of videos where we are configuring the quiz module step by step. However, if you're watching this video as a standalone, I will show you how to follow along the instructions in this video. So we are currently in the settings page of a sample quiz that I've just set up. So I'm going to click on turn editing on and go to my test quiz, my sample quiz, click on edit and edit settings. And now the settings page loads up. In the rest of the video, we will explore the options available on this page. The next step in the sequence is the common module settings. And the first option here is visible. So it's pretty straightforward. You can either opt to show the quiz or you can hide the quiz using either of these two options. The next option is ID number. You can type in an ID number for the quiz, and each resource or an activity would have a unique ID number. But this is usually used for custom calculations, and we highly recommend that you do not use custom calculations because it's not a very well implemented tool within Moodle and Gauchospace. So definitely recommend to stay away from custom calculations, and that is the reason why we would have very less use for an ID number. Moving on, we have group modes. So you can either have separate groups or visible groups. This is the option that is usually opted for when we want to add certain restrictions on using the quiz, and the kind of restrictions that we can put on a quiz we'll be looking up in this new tab over here. I've actually opened it up, but it would be closed, and we can add restrictions through this particular tab. Once we click on this option separate groups, it automatically activates this option right here, which is add group or grouping access restrictions. And by clicking that, we automatically move to this tab where we can add a grouping restriction. The quiz will be accessible to only the students that match this grouping restriction. So you can choose the group. At the moment I just have group 1 and group 2, but by default many courses that have different TA sections, the default groupings would be based on those sections. So I can choose this quiz to be accessible to only students that belong to group 1. I can also choose the restrictions where all the students that do not belong to group 1 would have access to the quiz. So these restrictions are only possible when we use this separate groups option in group mode. If you do not have, or if you do not intend to use restrictions, do not use group mode. Do not use this separate group options, keep it to no groups, and also make sure to delete this restriction from here as well. We already looked at this new tab where we have added a restriction, but we can add restrictions based on, we've seen the group option here, but you could also add restriction based on a date, grade, user profile, or a restriction set. What do these options mean? Let's go to date. You can allow students to access the quiz from this particular date in this particular time. So adding a new date restriction, we can choose the quiz to be accessible from, say, this date and until this particular date. Well, clearly this date has to be a later date, so let's say 24th July to 27th July 2018. So these are the days between which the students would be able to access the quiz. Now at the moment I'm just going to remove those date restrictions as we want to look at some of the other options. And you can also have a grade restriction, so all the students that match a particular grade on a particular assignment, say someone who scored more than 50% on a midterm, only they would be able to access this particular quiz. So must be greater than, say, 50% and less than 100%. So all the students who have got 50% or more points on the midterm would be able to access this quiz. I'm going to remove this again. We're going to look at the other option. You can also choose restrict access based on user profiles. That's not a very common thing to do, but you can browse through the list of options here. For example, if you want to restrict access to students only from a particular department, you can set the value here. Honestly, I don't see much use for restrictions based on user profiles. Usually most classes have restrictions based on a group, and that's the most commonly used restriction used in a course. The last option here is restriction set, and you can also add any combination of restrictions together and create a restriction set. Using this option, we are getting into a very complex logic, and it's not something that you would recommend. Let's keep the course as simple as possible. Let's keep the restrictions simple as possible. So unless there is a really good reason why you would need to use a restriction set, I would suggest not to use it. At the moment, I've had no restrictions added to the quiz. Last thing, most important, is you need to save, and you can use either of these two options. You can either save and return to course, and you can select save and display. Make sure all the settings are saved and go back to your original home page. So far we have looked at how to create a quiz activity. In the next few videos, we are going to look at how we can create questions, how we can create a question bank and upload those questions onto a quiz.